Weapons. They're wielded by the most noblest of heroes, unscrupulous of souls, and everything in between. A weapon can be any shape or size, and each one has a silent history etched into its material. To possess one is a great privilege, and that's where I come in. You may be familiar with it already, but I want to introduce you to an RPG game called ATLYSS. It's a relatively niche indie game currently in early access purgatory, but what's there is very promising. The game loop is simple. You make a little goober, run around completing dungeons to level up, and keep doing that until you hit the level cap. Along the way you'll find a ton of cool loot and maybe make a few friends. ATLYSS has a world bubbling with possibility, but with one very prominent downside. Big updates are few and far between. And that's fine for a solo developer, but it's only natural for the player base to get antsy and crave new content, so some have decided to take that into their own hands with modding. This game has a plethora of mods. There's one that lets you swap textures, one that uncaps the character sliders, and even one that lets you throw car batteries into the ocean. But recently I've had my eyes set on mods that add custom weapons. If ATLYSS's default weapons don't suit your fancy, there's plenty of player-made ones with their own custom stats and models. Seeing all the cool stuff people have made inspired me to take a crack at it. I know a bit about 3D modeling, so making my own custom weapons can't be too hard, right? In this video, I'll be making 4 different modded weapons for ATLYSS, taking you along with me through my design process so you can see what goes into making custom items. At the end, I'll be getting my weapons judged by one of the biggest ATLYSS mod reviewers, MannacKin, which has me a little nervous because this is my first time doing this. If you wish to follow along at home, all the programs and resources I used will be provided in the description. You can treat this like a tutorial, or as entertainment to watch during your lunch break. Regardless, I'll do my best to make this beginner friendly, but this video does assume you're at least vaguely familiar with how Blender works. In order to make weapons that are both unique and have a bit of history to them, I found 4 honorable heroes from the community I hang out in, and had them each give me a rundown of what kind of weapon they'd like. Let's start with this fine knight, Sir Elius. He wants a sword made with bronze and gemstones, and intends to pass it down to his partner. There are 7 main weapon types in ATLYSS, and this blade would fall under the melee category. This is for one-handed weapons that boast high swing speeds and the ability to pair it with a shield. I was also provided a reference image of what the general design should look like, and my goal is to make something similar while staying within the bounds of ATLYSS's art style. The art style is deceptively simple. You may think it can't be too hard to replicate because of the basic models, but the real brunt of the work is done by the expert texture painting done by the game's developer, KISSF. I certainly can't paint that well, and I tend to work with higher poly models anyways, so instead of trying to go for something one-to-one with the in-game models, I'll try to meet it in the middle by going for slightly higher detailed meshes with a decent coat of paint. This way, the weapons I make will fit in pretty naturally with the game, while being tailored towards my design process. Anyways, I can tell Elius is getting antsy, so let's get to modeling. I started by opening up Blender and performed the ritual every 3D modeler does, selecting the default cube and all the other objects in the scene and nuking them by pressing X. To set up my scene, I aligned my camera using the gimbal so that the X and Z axis is visible, and imported my reference image by pressing Ctrl A and inserting an image object so we don't have to constantly swap between tabs. The image wasn't aligned properly, so I hit R to rotate and tilted it by about 45 degrees, making sure it was lined up with the X axis. Once that was done, I moved the image back by pressing G to grab, and then Y to lock it to the Y axis, making room for when I finally begin modeling. Not yet though, I had to save the file first so I don't lose any progress. To get a good reference for sizes, an arm and body model were appended to the scene. To make the process of modeling easier, I made the reference image render in front of other objects, and turned down its opacity, sort of like having a reference layer when making 2D art. Ctrl A, add a vert, and now we have all we need to get started with this sword. By pressing G to grab and E to extrude, I positioned the vertices where they needed to go, with the goal of making a basic outline for extra reference. What can I say, I like to be precise. Only one half of the outline needs to be made, because with our friend the mirror modifier, we can reflect what I made on the Z-axis. I then turned on clipping so the vertices merge together when they get close. At this point I saved what there was into its own reference collection, and made a new collection for the actual sword model, a good practice I do to keep things concise. I like to save the older iterations of what I make both to preserve how they looked during the design process, and because I have trouble letting go. With all the preparations out of the way, it's finally time to model, and I started by inserting a circle with 8 sides to make the handle. By extruding the circle and adjusting the shape, I finished the handle and moved on to making the pommel, using another extruded 8-sided circle and rotated cube for the cap. For some added detail, I pressed I to inset some faces onto the cube, and poked a hole through it. I then filled in the inside of the shape and scaled it down on 2 axes at once by pressing both X and Z. When it came to the rain guard, I struggled with getting the topology right, so I did the cross guard instead. By the way, I'm no sword expert, so correct me if I'm using those terms wrong. I want to keep the 3D cursor perfectly aligned with the center of the crossguard, as the 3D cursor is where newly added objects spawn in at. So to do that, I selected two opposite points on the outline, pressed Shift S, and chose Cursor to Selected. Now I can trust that the circle I just imported for the crossguard is centered and not misaligned in any way. The guard was made in the same style as the pommel, but I had trouble making everything fit together. Instead of bashing my head against that brick wall, I worked on the blade, manipulating it to fit into the shape of the outline. It was after I finished the blade that I figured the rain guard would work best if I just flattened it, and now that's looking much better. Some extra details were added to the crossguard, and I filled in the empty caps of the cylinder objects. The purpose of filling in the ends, despite them not being visible, was for the UV unwrapping step later. The objects need to not have any gaps for the unwrapping algorithm to work. Speaking of, I checked the normals of the object and found some were flipped in the wrong direction. As a gross simplification, the normals dictate which part is the outside and inside of the object, and if they're flipped, then the inside is the outside and vice versa. Not great for when we want to go texture painting later. That's very easy to fix though by just going into edit mode, selecting all the vertices, pressing Ctrl N and selecting Recalculate Outside. It was time for the finishing touches before the texturing phase, and that included removing the extra bits around the crossguard as I felt it was too detailed for the art style. I also moved the entire sword so that the handle is centered around the world origin so it actually looks right when imported into the game, adjusted more of the details, and filled in any missing gaps in the objects. The modeling is done, but we're only halfway finished. There's still UV unwrapping and texture painting to do. And some more things, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. UV unwrapping is the process of telling the model how it should unfold so a 2D image can be applied to it. This unfolded part of the model is called an island, and each island of the sword has to fit into a single image texture. The goal is to minimize any visible seams, warping, and size issues due to improper scaling and rotation of the islands. Unwrapping isn't too hard. For each object I opened it up into edit mode, selected an edge loop with Ctrl R, right-clicked and pressed Mark Seam. A seam is where the model will unwrap at, and the goal is to have just enough that the islands have minimal warping. Each seam was aligned with the blade, and once all of the objects were given seams, it was time to unwrap them all. I went one object at a time, pressing U and selecting the unwrap option, but for whatever reason, one island failed to unwrap. I can figure that out later. Instead, I made a new material to test the scaling and rotation of the UVs. I opened the material editor, linked the image texture to the output, chose a new image texture, set the size to 128 by 128, and changed the generated type to UV grid. This makes us a grid we can use to check if the scaling of the islands are about equal and are aligned to the right axis. It would be bad if the UVs of an object are going in different directions, as it could make a visible seam. I did end up finding out what the issue was with the island that failed to unwrap. It was simply missing an edge loop. Oops. Unwrapping wasn't too long of a process. The first step was just getting all the islands on the board, ignoring any sort of overlapping, and once the scaling looked right and the axes were aligned, the second step was to use the Pack Islands option to have Blender do the hard work of efficiently getting those UVs in place with no intersections. It's important to raise the margin a bit. That's how much space there is between islands, and if they're too close together, it could lead to pixel bleed when it comes time to paint. Speaking of, now that Elius' sword is modeled and unwrapped, we can finally get to the fun part. But we need to set up a new material first to act as our canvas. That's super easy though, and once I slap the material onto one object, I can select the rest in the scene and use Ctrl L to link the materials. This allows me to apply the material to all the other objects as long as I have the main one selected. Blender's built-in texture painting tools are pretty alright. You've got plenty of brushes and effects at your disposal, but there's one very important add-on we'll be using today to make the process much easier. When it comes to painting by default, the entire image texture is treated like one flat canvas. For this project, I'll be using the Haas Paint Layers add-on, giving you the ability to paint with individual layers that stack on top of each other. The add-on is free too, and I put a link to it in the description. To make sure the sword was ready for painting, I did a quick test with a white brush on a black background, and I found that I had missed some UV islands during the packing process, thus leading to some overlapping. After repacking the islands, the model was finally ready to be painted, so it was time to set up that Haas material. This involved making the material 128 by 128 to get it crunchy like ATLYSS's art style, changing the shader type to unlit because the models in-game have no shading, and setting the view transform from default to standard. This last step is especially important for when you want to do anything involving color in Blender, as it gives you the exact color value of everything in your scene instead of it being run through filters. I'm not sure why this isn't Blender's default. Working with the Paint Layers add-on can be a bit tricky as there's a lot of buttons to get used to, so feel free to tinker around with it before starting. You always want to be in the Texture Painting tab when using it. The active layer will be displayed as blue, and you need to save each layer as an individual image before you ever close the file. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which Elius requested that the guard of his sword be bronze with blue gemstone accents and a silver blade, something completely doable. I imported the reference image again and used that to grab the needed colors, starting with a base color layer just to get the general idea of where things should go. While I do that, a good tip with this paint layers add-on is to check the resolution of the layer itself, as sometimes it can be different than what you set the whole material to be. Not great when you're trying to work with small dimensions. Once the colors are down, I made 2 more layers, one for shading and another for lighting. When it comes to shading, I personally reduce and shift the color value, as just making the color darker doesn't look very good to me. When I first got into painting with Blender, I was under the assumption that I needed a ton of fancy brushes to make anything look good, but honestly all you need is the default paintbrush, airbrush, and blur tool. I drew darker shades in the corners of the objects and a sort of ambient occlusion effect, and highlights where the light might naturally bounce off the weapon. The goal is to be subtle, just enough detail that the blade doesn't look too boring, but not too much to be overbearing. The gemstones were the best part. All it took were stacked layers of different blue and purple hues to get just the right look. A great feature with this add-on is the ability to change the opacity of each layer so you can fine-tune things even more. And finally, we're done with texturing. I will say that it looks a little bit dull though, so I popped the texture into Krita and adjusted the colors to let Elius pick which one he likes more. You went for that one? Really? Well, the customer is always right. It's time to finalize this thing, and I saved the file as an incremental so I have a fallback just in case I want to edit something later. I then deleted all of the other objects in the scene, joined the objects of the Elius sword together with Ctrl-J, cleared out the unused data blocks to reduce file bloat, and applied all the transformations. This was a necessary step for optimization, but the last step is especially important to make sure the scaling is right when put into the game. I exported the paint layers into one singular image texture, but Blender crashed the first time I tried it. Good thing I saved, right? Before I import the model into the game, it needs an icon. ATLYSS has 32 by 32 icons for each item in the game, and I'd need a way to make my own. I could spend a few minutes making a rough one with pixel art, or I could make my own custom icon maker where all I need to do is to append the weapon to the scene, position it, and hit render. Look at that nice outline and proper scaling. Not bad for something that took a few hours to set up. If you want to try out this icon creator for yourself, the link is in the description. We have the Sword of Elius done, but there's just one last step, and that's figuring out its stats. Weapons in ATLYSS can have special bonuses that apply to your character when it's equipped, and the list of what we have to work with is pretty sizable. It can even have the chance to apply a debuff when damaging an enemy, or have different weapon trails. Luckily for us, the modding tools allow for complete customization, and Elius has requested some stats tailored to melee combat. Upon wielding, he'll get a 1.5% increased crit rate, 15 more magic power, 7 more max stamina, and 13 more attack power. He doesn't want any other bonuses, and would like a silver trail that matches the blade. Overall, these are pretty balanced and basic stats, but it's perfect for the kind of combat Elius will be doing. You generally want to avoid making items too OP, that's a good way to ruin the fun for others. Elius' sword has been modeled, unwrapped, painted, and finalized. It's time to export the file as a GLB and leave it for later. I still have 3 other weapons to make, and I am actually leaving the importing to a friend of mine to do. I will, however, be demonstrating later how to import a weapon into the game myself, after I get the other weapons done, since I don't want to take any half measures with this video. Anyways, this thing swings pretty well and looks even better. Can you put this up on the rack for me? That's one weapon done out of 4. Now that I've gone over the process, it shouldn't take us too long to do the rest. Next up is Julian, a hunter who wants a greatsword to help him kill things, hopefully excluding me. I was given a reference image and a request that the sword is hefty and dark gray in color. This intimidating weapon will be called the Blackleaf blade, named in honor of his duo's fighting team, the Blackleafs. Of the 7 weapon types in ATLYSS, this one would be a heavy weapon, allowing for slow but high damage output. I started by deleting everything in the scene and importing a reference image and some objects. You know the drill: rotate, reduce opacity, display in front. It's now time to make a basic outline by extruding a vert around and using a mirror modifier to reflect the other half of our work. Hey Julian, how does this look? Awesome. With the green light to start modeling, the first thing I made was the handle by extruding an 8-sided circle. Next was the blade, but then I was a bit stuck where to go from there. It was hard to visualize in my head how I wanted the hilt area to look, but eventually I got it working. The cross guards were easy, just some extruded 8-sided circles reflected on both sides. For the pommel, I had to first make sure the object I placed would be centered with the handle. To do this, I took 2 vertices from the handle and pressed Ctrl S, choosing cursor to selected. This way the cursor is moved to the average of all those points and perfectly positioned for that object. Now that I think about it, I probably could have selected the whole edge loop instead. Oh well. The pommel was simple enough to make, and it was at that point I realized the side spikes on the hilt would look better as separate objects. Some time was spent bulking up the different parts of the sword and giving it more angles for depth. A bit of a side tangent here. I said earlier that I wanted to make these weapons in my own style, but just as a little experiment I tried recreating the Blackleaf blade but in ATLYSS's art style. The weapons in-game are all one object and tend to be chunkier in shape, but after making this abomination, it's safe to say I won't be doing that again. It was time for UV unwrapping, and that means filling in the blank spaces of the objects and marking certain edge loops as seams. Some time was spent naming all of the objects and making sure things were scaled right, and then I was ready to begin unwrapping. To start, I made a UV grid texture to visualize how the model will unwrap, and selected all of the objects in edit mode, pressing U to unwrap. Once again, it's important to leave some margin so that the painting doesn't bleed onto the other islands when it comes time to paint. Once things looked about right, I set up a new material to be the Blackleaf blade's texture, applying it to all the objects by applying the texture to one object after removing the UV texture, selecting the other objects, pressing Ctrl L and selecting Link Materials. Let's begin texture painting, and it was time for our friend Haas paint layers to make our life much easier. After setting up the scene, setting texture filtering to unlit, and changing the texture size to 128 by 128, I used a white brush on a black background to double check my UVs. Our margins looked good, so I was clear to make the layers. One for the base colors, one for shading, and one for highlights. I put darker colors around the contact points to make ambient occlusion, and decreased the strength of the brush to make the hilt look more worn. Then some highlights and details were added to the fabric grip. I had to fiddle with the blending of the layers to get it looking right, and eventually I got it just about how it should be. Oh shit, it just crashed. I remembered to save the layers, right? No, I did not, and because of that, all of the painting I just did was gone. Learn from my mistakes and save each layer, lest you lose a bunch of progress like I did. It's fine though, soon enough I was back to where I was and the Blackleaf blade was looking better than ever. With the textures done, I duplicated the objects into a new iteration and joined them all together with Ctrl J. To center the sword, I moved the middle of the handle to the world origin, set the 3D cursor to the world origin, and set the object's origin to the 3D cursor. You can tell if your object is centered right if it rotates around the handle when you, well, rotate it. For the cleanup process, I saved the file as an increment and removed all of the unnecessary data from the scene, and with that done I exported it as a GLB. But the keen-eyed of you may have noticed I missed a very important step. Yes, I forgot to apply the transforms, and it did lead to some sizing issues. It also wasn't scaled properly either and looked tiny in-game, but what I had was enough to make an icon at least. Julian deserves more than a half-baked sword, so I had to give it a round of fixes. That meant increasing the size of the weapon and bulking up parts of it to make it really feel like a heavy weapon, and actually remembering to apply the transforms before exporting. I didn't have to redo the icon though, since the changes wouldn't be visible at such a small resolution. For the stats, we'll go with something punchier with higher max stamina, higher attack power across the board, higher crit rates, and it was given a bonus of an 8% chance to apply bleed on hit. Pairing that with a blood red swing trail, and this hefty thing is sure to give any enemy a run for their money. This is a weapon perfect for a fighter, one of the 3 main classes in ATLYSS. Mind putting that up for me? Thanks. 2 down, 2 left to go, and it seems like we have some double trouble in the form of Hiruru and Breakfast. Let's go with Hiruru first. This one's going to be quite different. Instead of a melee weapon this time, Hiruru is requesting a ranged weapon, and a fun one at that. He wants a compact slug shotgun in the form of a spear gun. It sounds silly, but ATLYSS already has the Magitech burst gun, so this isn't much of a stretch. Lore-wise, this thing actually used to be a burst gun before being fixed up by Breakfast, and the name of such a weapon will be the Wild Havoc. It'll be perfect for someone like Hiruru, an ex-criminal who isn't afraid of fighting a little dirty. Once again, we start with a new file and delete everything from the scene, import our reference images, and append the Magitech burst gun model for extra reference. It's a bit hard to see the outline of the model though with all these triangles. The reason why these are here is because video games render things with triangles and not the quads we're working with. We can easily clean it up though by selecting all of the vertices with A and hitting Alt-J to untriangulate the model. I created a new iteration category and made the outline, extruding the vert around into the general shape of a gun and trying to keep it similar to the burst gun reference. With the outline complete, I started modeling the gun itself by extruding a tube part for the barrel and another tube for the grip. The main body of the gun was easy to make. All it needed was a mirror modifier on the Y-axis and some extruding to make it 3D. I made quads by selecting 4 verts and hitting F to fill. but honestly it would have been faster if I selected 2 edges instead. Next, I added some more components to the gun and adjusted its look to be more intimidating. Comparing the Wild Havoc to the burst gun, I realized I could use some bulking up. I tweaked the geometry and widened the grip to accommodate the game's animations, as I'm sort of guessing where the hands of the character will line up. This looks good enough, and I moved the handle to the world origin before I got to UV unwrapping. I made my seams, unwrapped the model, tested with the UV map material, and made my Haas paint layers material after things looked good to me. There was a problem though. When I tried painting with a white brush on a black background, nothing was happening. The solution to this was actually pretty simple. You see, the model thinks it's inside out right now, so I actually am painting, it's just showing up on the inside. Remember what I said about an object's normals earlier? To fix it, I had to select all of the objects, go into edit mode, select all of the vertices, and hit Alt-N to recalculate normals. With that out of the way, I was able to get to painting, and after getting my base colors down, I closed Blender to get some rest. When I came back though, I was met with the dreaded sight of all my progress being gone. I had forgotten to save the layers individually again. Alright, I'll just give it another go. This time I actually saved the layers, and once I redid all my progress, I added finer details like paint scratches and blotches in the middle. Ruru requested a ribbon around the grip, which wasn't too hard to make, and I matched it with the color of the iron sights. It was finalization time, but while I get the Wild Havoc ready to be exported, I want to go over 2 mistakes I made here. First, I forgot to move the object's origin to the world origin, and second, I didn't apply the transforms. These steps aren't optional, and my friend who imported this into the game wasn't happy, so once again please learn from my failures. What I had was enough to make an icon though, one that will soon get changed out when I fix up the Wild Havoc model. There's a few things that need fixed. In-game the weapon looks too small, the animations were changed in an update and now the hands don't hold it properly. The ribbon only renders on one side since it's a flat plane, and here Ruru wants the ribbon to be red. I'll start with adjusting the color of the ribbon since that's the easiest to tackle. Instead of redrawing everything, I popped the texture into Krita and used the filter mask with an HSV adjustment to alter the color from green to red. From there, I was able to simply save the image and slap it back onto the model, and that also meant I had to redo the icon. The model was beefed up some more, the shading was adjusted for the red color, and the ribbon was made 3D so it can be seen from all angles now. Now it's ready to be exported as a GLB and sent off to the importer. Shit. Still 2 issues. I had forgotten to adjust the origin again, and the animations still don't line up. Both were fixed with a slap on the wrist and the model being slightly rotated so the hands can still hold it. A tacky but decent workaround. For the Wild Havoc stats, it's a dexterity-focused shotgun, meaning it's more attuned for the bandit class. It boasts high damage, increased dexterity power, and higher evasion. On hit, there's a 12% chance to apply bleed, and it uses the piercing bow projectile for a heavy single shot of damage. Whew, pretty good. Last but certainly not least is Breakfast, a daring and dashing little guy in need of a weapon that serves multiple purposes. He'd like something with the ability to pry open doors, break the blade off of attackers' swords, and smash in people's faces. He also requests a plush handle grip and for the color scheme to match his armor. The face of the weapon will be its defining feature, a giant heart. This thing will be called the Lovemaker, and it'll be another heavy weapon. At this point I had become pretty familiar with the process, especially considering all the fumbles I had along the way. But that's how you learn, right? After importing my references, I constructed a basic outline to follow, and then I started with the modeling. Most of the construction was pretty basic, like the handle being an extruded cylinder or the head being a cube, but the face of the hammer was going to be a bit of a doozy. It had to be a heart shape, so I constructed one using vertices and chucked a solidify modifier on there. Breakfast didn't like how that looked though and requested I adjust how the face and head connect, so some sizes were adjusted. For the Lovemaker's swordbreaker bars, I tried putting them on the handle, but I imagine it would be pretty difficult to get a sword lodged in there, so they were instead inset into the head's crowbar area. It may not be the most effective, but they look pretty damn cool. For the grip, it was just a bunch of stacked cylinders connected together and manipulated in a way to make it look more plush-like. Now into marking our UV seams and unwrapping, and things went pretty smoothly. Even the hammer face, despite how complex it may look, wasn't too bad to unwrap. Now that the Lovemaker is prepped and unwrapped, I set up our Haas material to get to painting, using Breakfast's armor as color references. My favorite bits has to be the scratch marks on the face and the grip. It's these little details that really add up. I was asked to put a ribbon on the end of the hammer like Hiruru's Wild Havoc, a cute idea not indicative of anything else going on. After the texturing was done and the layers were properly saved, the model was finalized and prepped for exporting. I cooked up a little icon too while waiting to hear back from the importer, and when I did, the feedback I received showed that the Lovemaker had some problems. The weapon looked way too small in-game, and the head was clearly too close to the character. The handle grip needed more adjustments too, and the origin wasn't properly aligned with the world origin. These are simple fixes though, requiring me to import the wooden hammer model from ATLYSS into my scene to get the scaling right. Despite moving a lot of the pieces of the Lovemaker around, the texture only required a minimal amount of adjustments, and soon enough the weapon was ready to be exported again. That's much better. The stats were straightforward, dealing a high amount of damage per swing with a bonus to dexterity and crit rate. On hit, there's a 20% chance of inflicting the target with the burn condition. I'm not sure how that works exactly, but there's probably a joke about burning passion in there somewhere. That's the Lovemaker done, and it can be put up on the rack with the other weapons. Hey Pim, will you do the honors? Thanks. That's 4 weapons modeled and imported into ATLYSS, and check out how they look in game. Each one is fairly balanced and is very fun to use, holding up quite well during combat. If you're looking to try these out yourself, you absolutely can by using the mod in the description. It contains a bunch of other custom weapons and items made by some friends of mine, and you might find some new favorites in there. If you've never downloaded ATLYSS mods before, I've also linked a quick tutorial made by the mod tester I mentioned earlier. Speaking of, these 4 seem to like their new toys, but does it pass the judgment of MannacKin?
Hello everyone, and thank you Mello for handing me the spotlight for just a few moments. I'm going to go over some of these modded weapons, and we've got a few to go over, so without any further delay, let's just get straight into it. First up on our list is Wild Havoc, which is a burst gun. Now, for those of you who know me, I love burst guns, most likely my favorite weapon in the game. Now, this particular weapon, I love the color scheme, which is very simple, black and red. Is that red? I think that's red. Colors aside, this weapon actually looks like it's a vanilla weapon if you didn't know that it was modded. This one's got a big fat thumbs up from me. The next weapon is Lovemaker, which is a hammer. I love hammers, and it looks like this hammer loves me too. I mean, look at that heart on it. Obviously it's got feelings for me or something, but of all the weapons, this is probably my favorite one. So this one is another big fat thumbs up. Next up is the Blackleaf blade. This one is very cool. I mean, it's black, and also we've got more red going on, which seems to be a pretty common theme, but it works. It's really cool. One problem with this though, I can't seem to fit it in my pockets. I guess it'll have to do for now. I'll stick it on my back. And next up we have Elius's blade. Elius? Besides from being hard to pronounce, it also looks extremely sharp, and also screams knight in shining armor. I would give this a thumbs up, but I accidentally cut my finger on it, so it gets a fist. Well, that's it for my bit. Thank you, Mello, for sharing the spotlight, and I'm turning it back to you. Until I see you again, this has been MannacKin.
Whew, not bad for my first time modding, but our work isn't done yet. I actually haven't learned the whole importing process yet. Luckily for us, there's plenty of documentation out there thanks to Catman, one of the members of the Homebrewery team. Homebrewery is the mod that makes modding ATLYSS a much smoother process. None of this would have been possible without the dedication of the modders who made this framework others can build off of. And I'd like to shout out their hard work here. I respect the effort and I fear for your sanity. Using this guide, I like to import this rapier I made for Pim over there so he can use it on his dungeon runs. I figure it's a good enough payment for him being my co-host, mascot, and punching bag. Now then, let's give it a shot. I'll be using Homebrewery through the R2 Modman mod manager, accessible easily by the Thunderstore. This makes editing and managing the files super simple, and if you're looking to make your own mods, then this is the way to go. I already have a mod profile set up, and I'll be importing this rapier into the Shy Armory mod. If you're looking to follow along at home and don't have a mod to import your weapon into, you can learn how to make your own using the linked documentation. Otherwise, you'll just have to find somebody else who will add your weapon to their mod. Before I got started, I located the Shy Armory file directory by opening R2 Modman, going to the settings, and opening the profile folder. I then went through BepInEx, plugins, and now we're at where all the mods are stored. Shy Armory was the folder I needed, and I dicked around with the file browser to figure out what I was working with. For the purposes of importing weapons, there are two folders that we need to focus on: Mesh and Weapons. The Mesh folder has more folders inside, each one containing a mesh used by the weapon item. The mesh should be a GLB file, and there should only be one in a folder. Over in the Weapons folder, we once again have more folders inside corresponding to a weapon. Inside of these is the weapon's icon, texture, and parameter file. Each of these needs to be named accordingly, otherwise they won't work. However, the weapon folder and the mesh inside can be named whatever you want, but you want the name to be something easy to type out because we'll be linking to the name in the param file soon. First though, I had to take this rapier model and export it properly. I was given some amazing guidance from the modder WawaTofu on how to export a weapon model as a GLB the right way, as while the way I was doing it worked, there were some crucial steps I missed. During the exporting process, it's important to disable animation, shape keys, and skinning. These don't add anything but bloat our file size, and that's another thing we can cut down by turning on this compression option. Here's the rapier file with and without compression, and just look at that difference. Sure, it's only a few kilobytes we're working with, but optimization is a lost art that needs practice more, and it makes loading mods faster. Now that I have this GLB exported the right way, I made a new folder in the Shy Armory Mesh folder and labeled it PimSword. The mesh was then pasted in, and I made a folder in the Weapons folder also named PimSword. Inside the Weapons folder, I put in the rapier's icon and texture, and copied the param file from another weapon to use as a template. A more efficient person would have used the file of a sword as a base for their sword, but I used a gun for some reason. It was still a good spot to use as a jumping off point, and the first order of business was changing which mesh folder the weapon is linked to. The only thing you need to change is the folder name, which I edited to Pim Rapier. When the weapon is swung, it leaves behind a trail, something that is easily customized with a color hex code. The sort index was changed to an arbitrary number. This number bypasses the game's normal way of sorting items by alphabet and instead groups by index value. You can just leave it at 0 though. I then changed the name and description and saved the file, deciding to test it out in game before I make any further progress. The good news is the rapier loads in the inventory. The icon, name, and description all works, but the bad news is the model is not there. At least the trail shows up when I swing it. When I looked at the parameter file again, I had found what the issue was. I had written down the wrong name for the meshes folder. It should be PimSword, not Pim Rapier. Once that was fixed, I replaced the bonuses with ones tailored for a Mystic build, and restarted the game. And sure enough, the model loads this time. Only it's too small and flipped the wrong way around. The fix for that wasn't too bad, as I just had to scale up and rotate the model in Blender, but it took me 5 times exporting the GLB and getting no change before I realized I had forgotten to apply the transforms. That's looking much better now. Going from completely clueless about the importing process to having a fully working weapon in less than an hour isn't too bad if I say so myself. Now Pim can join the Cool Weapons Club. After all that, what have I learned? What would I do differently next time? And do I have a refined process that you can follow along with at home in the form of a checklist? Well, I have the answers to all of the above. This project helped me learn how the Haas Paint Layers add-on works, what the difference between a rain guard and a cross guard is, how to adjust the colors of textures in Krita, figure out better methods of modeling hard surface objects, and realize I probably need to be taking something for memory loss with how many times I forgot basic steps. There's a few things I would do differently the next time I make a modded weapon. I was going about importing references wrong. Instead of using an arm and body model to find the right proportions, you should import a weapon of the type you're trying to make and have it fit roughly within those dimensions. I'd also follow some sort of checklist so I don't miss any step, and I provided one I made in the description. Down in the description are plenty of other resources and tools to hopefully help you with your own modding journey. There's all the Homebrewery guides, a folder containing a model of each weapon type to use as reference, the icon making scene, the Haas Paint Layers add-on for Blender, the aforementioned checklist, a link to the ATLYSS modding Discord in case you have any questions, and anything else I couldn't think of while writing the script. If there's one thing I can't forget though, it's all the people I want to personally shout out for their help and hard work, and to give Pim his rapier back. Here. I'd like to thank the entire Homebrewery team. If your name is up here, then you're probably really cool and deserve to have your efforts acknowledged. I want to specifically acknowledge Catman again for the Homebrewery wiki, ZeinaKC for the same thing and all her help troubleshooting mod stuff within the Shy community, and WawaTofu for helping me through the importing process and giving me some really good tips. Shoutouts to those who proofread my script for this video, and to MannacKin for the collaboration opportunity. Oh, yeah, and thank you for sticking around until the end. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Someday I might get around to learning how to make custom maps. That's about it. I'll see you in a few months when I decide to upload again. See ya.